Welcome everyone, welcome to English class. Today we are going to read and enjoy a beautiful poem by William Wordsworth. The title of the poem is Lines Written in Early Spring. William Wordsworth wrote poetry during the Romantic age in English literature. The Romantic poetry had certain common features which made Romantic poetry different from the classical poetry of the age of the past. Here we find that mostly the Romantic poets wrote poems addressing common man. Here we find man speaking to men, and normally Romantic poets chose themes from everyday situations, ordinary life. Common man's life became theme of poetry for the first time in English literature. This is why the Romantic poetry was different from the classical poetry of the past. William Wordsworth was a poet who was greatly influenced by the features of the age and by the historical incidents of his time. And one thing that influenced him greatly was the French Revolution. In this poem that we are going to read and enjoy, we find the theme has something to do with the French Revolution, the disillusionment, the disappointment Wordsworth had when he found the developments in France after the French Revolution. Let us recite the poem, Lines Written in Early Spring by William Wordsworth. I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a grove I sat reclined, in that sweet mood when pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. To her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran, and much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Through primrose tufts in that sweet bower, the periwinkle trailed its wreaths, and it is my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes. The birds around me hoped and played, their thoughts I cannot measure, but the least motion which they made, it seemed a thrill of pleasure. The budding twigs spread out their fan to catch the breezy air, and I must think, do all I can, that there was pleasure there. If this belief from heaven be sent, if such be nature's holy plan, have I not reason to lament what man has made of man? Nature is the central theme in most of Wordsworth's poems. And this poem is also about nature, the nature of mankind. What is nature to us? How we relate to nature and how nature relates to us. What man has done to nature and what man has done to other men. This is the central theme of this poem. For William Wordsworth, nature was something of a higher order experience. William Wordsworth was famously known as a pantheist. He had a worshipful attitude to nature. For Wordsworth, nature was the spirit. Nature is the mother. Nature is the mother who gives birth to every living organism in the world. So nature was a very living experience for William Wordsworth, and we find this very clearly in this poem that we are going to read. Now let us do a detailed analysis of the poem. I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a grove I sate reclined. The poem begins with a lovely description of something melodious, the sound of birds, the sound of the rivers, the sound of the breeze. It was a symphony of sounds, a blend of different sounds from nature. He begins this poem with a beautiful description of the experience when he was sitting in a grove, when he was sitting under a tree. In the next two lines, we read, in that sweet mood when the pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. Here, Wordsworth is speaking about the very pleasant experience he was having in the lap of nature. But suddenly, he started feeling uneasy. He started feeling sad. Some sad thoughts came to his mind. He's talking about that now. And now let us see what makes him sad. The following lines read, to her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran. Here he is speaking about the connection, the relationship between man and nature. Man and nature are not separate. Human beings are part of the nature, but we often believe that nature is for us to exploit, that nature is for us to use the way we want, but that is not the case. Here the poem makes it very clear to the reader that we are one with nature, that living in harmony with nature is very important to us. And it is also noteworthy in these lines, we find a poetic device used here. It is called personification. Look at the word nature used in this line. We find that nature is capitalized because here nature is treated like a human, and the poetic device used here is personification, and this makes the reader experience a living presence in nature. The poet's personification of nature makes us feel a little more closer and connected to nature. And then it reads, and it much grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Here the poet is speaking about how sad he feels seeing the world situation. He was actually speaking about the cruelties of war during his time, how cruelly men behaved to other men, how brutally people killed each other. This was what made the poet sad. Even now the situation is not different. You may all have heard about the brutal killing of a black man in America. He was brutally killed by a cop, a police officer. He was crying for help. He was desperately making him understand that he was innocent. But it was all in deaf ears. He did not heed his words. He did not care for his words. How can man be so cruel to other men? How can a man treat another human being in such inhuman manner? Wordsworth is saddened seeing this world situation, and which is the same even now. Even now we see atrocities around us. It is a sad situation. It's a tragic situation. And then it reads, through primrose steps in that green bower, the periwinkle trailed its wreaths. This is a beautiful description of nature. This is a classical example for a visual imagery. The poet depicts nature in all its colors, in all the variety. He is speaking about the different colors of flowers seen around him and how happy he feels on seeing them all around him. And now it reads, and it's my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes. Here the poet is speaking about life in nature, which is so joyful, which is so happy, which brims with joy, mirth, happiness. Even the flowers, the birds, every living organism in nature is in harmony. Everything is in harmony with one another. It's a beautiful song, it's a beautiful symphony. Here the poet is speaking about that. He says that he believes every flower is breathing, every flower is part of the larger life phenomenon. Every flower is seen as a being. Here the poet uses a personification example. Here the flower is treated as a human being. The poet speaks about the flower as it breathes, which means he is attributing human qualities to the flower. This makes us again feel a little more connected to nature, a little more closer, a little more intimate with nature. Then he says, the birds around me hoped and played, their thoughts I cannot measure. He is again describing the life forms he sees around him. He sees a lot of birds. He listens to their sound, to their music. And he says that the birds were busy. The birds were flying around him, making sounds. And he says he could not make out, he could not understand what do they feel, what were their thoughts. Here also we find that William Wordsworth is attributing human qualities to birds. In other words, the whole of nature for him is throbbing with life. It has a soul, has a spirit, of which we are also a part of. But the least motion which they made, it seemed a thrill of pleasure. Here William Wordsworth is speaking about the movement of birds, the sound of rivers, and the pleasure he experiences on seeing all this. There is joy in everything around him. The birds moved around. They moved and they chirped. And they made sounds, and it was all so joyful. It seemed that they were enjoying the beauty. They were enjoying the life, the joy of life, the joy of existence. And it is so energetic. He says that it is a thrill of pleasure. It is filled with joy, the birds, the river, everything in nature. Now in the next stanza, he is speaking about the plants, the flowers. He says, the budding twigs spread out their fan to catch the breezy air, and I must think, I do all I can, that there was pleasure there. Here he's saying that every plant, every flower is part of nature, and that it is enjoying the breeze, it is breathing, and it enjoys the cool breeze, the wind. And he says, and I must think, and he says he wanted to do all he could to enjoy, to feel that there was pleasure in nature, that there is joy in nature, that he is one with the spirit of nature. This is what we find in this line. In the next stanza, the poem becomes a little more serious. It becomes a little more philosophical. The poem reads, if this belief from heaven be sent, if such be nature's holy plan, have I not reason to lament what man has made of man? Here the poet is speaking about the holiness of nature, about the divinity in nature, and he feels that it is sent from heaven, that it is something holy. It was his belief that this is something divine, this is something godly. And nature has a plan. It has a plan of its own, which is something sacred. And that is why it says it is nature's holy plan. What is the holy plan of nature? The holy plan of nature is the fact that we are all part of nature, that we are one with nature, and it is inhuman, it is cruelty of man to turn against nature, to turn against other men. And the poet says, have we not reason to lament what man has made of man? How can man be so cruel to other men? This has not changed over time. Wordsworth wrote about the cruelty of men to other men so many years back, but still we find the cruelties around the world, the cruelties man is doing to other men on a daily basis. The poet is lamenting that. How can we be at peace? How can we be joyful seeing the predicament, seeing the sufferings, seeing the sorrow of people? This is what he is speaking about in this poem. On the one hand, there is joy, there is peace, there is holiness in nature. But when we think about human beings, we are so cruel, we are so unkind, we are so selfish. This makes life very difficult. This makes life devoid of all the beauty that he found in nature. So nature for William Wordsworth was something that gave him peace of mind, something that made him feel relaxed, something that made him feel a little spiritual, something that he was rather worshipped nature, something which made him feel so holy. And this poem is a classical example of Wordsworth's romantic poetry. Wordsworth's theme of nature is beautifully found in this poem. This is a beautiful poem of William Wordsworth. Lines written early in spring. The theme of the poem is nature, and how happy he feels, how joyful he feels when he is in the lap of nature, when he is alone sitting under a tree. And then he goes on to explain how man has been cruel to men, how man has been unkind to nature, how we destroyed nature ruthlessly, and what damage it has done to nature. This is what we find in this poem. The theme of the poem is nature and man. William Wordsworth's poem is a classical, exemplary poem of the Romantic period. He uses a very ordinary language. He speaks to ordinary people. This poem is so simple and beautiful that any person can easily read and appreciate this poem. Now let us look at some of the poetic devices used in this poem that makes it beautiful. One poetic device that he has used in this poem is personification. That we find in these lines. To her fair works did nature link. I refer to that when we were reading that line a short while ago. Here nature is personified. Nature is treated as a human being. And just note that it is a capital N written there, which makes it so clear that nature is treated as a human being. And the other line which is an example of personification is every flower enjoys the air it breathes. Here also the flower is treated as a human being, as something animate, and that is also an example of personification. And the other poetic devices found in this poem are imagery. Visual images are plentiful in this poem. We find visual images like the birds around me hopped and played is an example for visual image. And the other images are auditory and auditory image. And an example of auditory image is 1,000 blended notes. And we have a tactile image also. And tactile image is something that you feel as touch. And an example for tactile image is a breezy air is an example of tactile image. And alliteration is also made use of in this poem. In the line, for example, what man has made of man. The M sound repeats in this line, which is an example of alliteration. And it is also found in the line, much it grieved my heart. And this poem also makes use of rhyme scheme. It is ABAB pattern that is followed in this poem throughout. I hope you enjoyed this poem. I hope you like this poem very much. This is a beautiful poem of William Wordsworth. You read it a few more times and enjoy it. Thank you. Till we meet again. Goodbye. I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a grove I sat reclined, in that sweet mood when pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. To her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran, and much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Through primrose tufts in that sweet bower, the periwinkle trailed its wreaths, and it is my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes. The birds around me hoped and played, their thoughts I cannot measure, but the least motion which they made, it seemed a thrill of pleasure. The budding twigs spread out their fan to catch the breezy air, and I must think, do all I can, that there was pleasure there. If this belief from heaven be sent, if such be nature's holy plan, have I not reason to lament what man has made of man?